Hello and welcome to the Apologetics 315 podcast with your hosts Brian Auten and Chad Gross. Join us for conversations and interviews on the topics of apologetics, evangelism, and the Christian worldview.
Or you could accept the fact that this city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportion.
Well, welcome to the podcast. I'm here with Chad Gross and another co-host for this week, the Belfast Bigot. Yes, that's right. Hey, Chad. Hey, Bigot.
Hello.
Hello. I'm excited to have the Bigot back.
I'm excited to be here.
So today's interview is with Katy Faust. She's the founder and director of the children's rights organization Them Before Us. Really looking forward to this interview, and that's why we brought the Belfast Bigot on with us today to assist in this conversation because, well, Katy happens to be the original bigot. And we'll talk more about that as we get into the interview. Anything you're looking forward to today, Belfast Bigot?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Katy's work. I've been following it for several years, probably from the inception, from when she was the bigot, and it was a big inspiration on me. So I'm, not to be boring, but I'm looking forward to everything that this conversation is going to unpack. So very excited. I'm a bit of a fanboy, I should say.
How about you, Chad? We've had, well, all of us have had the opportunity to read through her book, Them Before Us. It's also not just the organization, but it's a book. Really enlightening. Wow. What do you think, Chad?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm wondering what's going to happen when the bigot meets the bigot. The original bigot meets the Belfast Bigot. You know, are there going to be stars aligning? Is there going to be
worlds collide?
It's like crossing the streams.
Yeah. That's what I was wondering. Exactly. You know, in reading her book, I think that some of the things she brings to bear, I was surprised at. First of all, just some of the issues that I personally think about, but as I was reading through the book, I thought, wow, you know, you really don't hear some of these issues brought about in the public square.
Yeah.
And it got me thinking about children's rights in a way that I admittedly had not prior. So I'm excited to continue to learn and see how I can put these things into practice in my own life.
Well, let's get ready for the interview.
Let's get ready. Switch me on.
Well, Katy, thanks for joining us for the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, as I was saying pre-show, Chad and I have read your book, but also our guest host with us today is the Belfast Bigot, who's also, a fan of your work. So, Katy, you're the original bigot. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and then we can have a fight between you guys?
Yes.
A bigot battle.
It's going to be Bigot Fight Club this whole episode.
I have the patriarch on my side, though, so, you know.
Oh, we're going there.
Right. Wow. The gloves are off, Brian. The gloves are off.
So a lot of people will ask me, like, how did you get into this? Like, how did you get into running a global children's rights movement and being a fierce advocate for traditional marriage? And my short answer is the left broke me. That's why I didn't ever want to get into like the topics and the issues that get you kicked out of mom Facebook groups, because I like to keep my friends and I love to be loved and I hate to be hated. And so that really kept me quiet for a long time. But, the sea change really happened in the United States after President Obama evolved on the topic of gay marriage. And what it felt like to me was that, now that they had the president on their side, they were free to label anyone and everyone who did not agree with the position of gay marriage as a bigot. And it didn't matter how well reasoned they were. It did not matter whether or not they were using non-religious arguments. It did not matter how many gay people that you knew and loved. It didn't even matter if you were gay yourself, right? That bigotry was the only possible explanation for support for traditional marriage. And that was enough. What I heard from people supporting gay marriage is lies about kids. They were lying about children. And I think one of the most vicious ways that you can, in saying that, kids don't care if they have two moms or two dads. And functionally, what that means is kids don't care if they have lost their mom or dad. And anybody that has been a child or spent time with children knows that that's a lie. My husband and I have been doing youth ministry for almost 3 decades. And the heart's cry of children when their dad has left them, when their mom is an addict on the street, when one of their parents have died, when there's a divorce and the dad has moved across the country and they haven't seen him for 2 years. And now I work with a lot of donor conceived children who were separated from their mother or father at birth. And it is these kinds of losses inflict what we call in the book a primal wound, a wound that goes right down to the very heart of what it means to be human. And therefore, it permeates almost every aspect of your life. And oftentimes it lasts all your life. So that was what did it for me. And so I started this ridiculous blog called Ask the Bigot, right? Okay, I guess bigotry is the only explanation for support for traditional marriage. So here I am, right? Ask me all your questions. And what I hoped people would find was the most well-reasoned and the most gracious, hopefully, voice, on the topic, but also unflinching in terms of why marriage is a social justice issue for children and how redefining marriage redefines parenthood. And that's unacceptable. So anyway, that's how the Bigot began. And I was outed by a very loving and tolerant gay blogger who actually doxed members of my church to try to get me to stop blogging. And it was a very much a what the enemy means for evil kind of situation, because once I was no longer blogging anonymously, I was being invited to, speak at the United Nations and submit amicus briefs to the Supreme Court. So yeah, it only increased my platform.
So when you went from being anonymous to public, that wasn't a choice then?
No, I'm a coward. I'm a total coward. Yeah. I wouldn't do this unless I wasn't pushed to do it. Like, I don't like it when people come after my children. I don't like it when people try to find my mother. So that's the other aspect of this. Wow. Is my parents divorced when I was 10, and my dad dated and remarried, and my mom repartnered with a woman. And I love her, and I love her partner. I don't consider myself to be a woman with two moms. Thankfully, my dad was in my life before and after the divorce, and I maintained a close relationship with him. But this absurdity, right, that you hate gay people if you support traditional marriage has really, really driven a lot of people into silence. Because all of us love gay people. All of us know and love people who are gay. Right. And unfortunately, for many traditional marriage supporters or just rational people in general, that love and protectiveness that they rightly feel for their gay and lesbian friends and family has forced them to cower.
So, Belfast Bigot, if I could ask, how did Katy influence you? And how did that lead to, the name and all of that?
Yeah, well, the name was the first thing that caught my eye because I thought it was clever, because it immediately struck me as something that would disarm people, because you take the wind out of their sails when you, as I said in my podcast, you take that away from them, and then they have to defend themselves because they can't call you names. They haven't got that in their armor anymore. And then the second thing was the clarity of her writing and the nuance in which she went into things that I had never even thought about before, and a lot of which is in the book as well. But I've since learned that was your friend that did all that, Katy.
That's right. That's no. So legit. I'm a great talker. I'm not a great writer. There's actually really nothing special about me at all. The book and the website and my writing are a success because God has ordained a divine partnership between my friend Stacy and I. And together, we probably wouldn't be able to do this. I'm sorry, apart, we wouldn't be able to do this, but together, it's not just an ironclad argument. It's actually fun to read.
Yeah, and I didn't mean that in a bad way. I thought that was an amazing dynamic.
Right. Yeah, right. Bigot, whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you were really starting to butter me up, but you know what? We're done here. Okay, Belfast Bigot. We're going to have some words later.
All right.
Well, thank you. I didn't know who you were, and I didn't know that we had reached that far. And I'm really glad to know you.
All the way across the water, yeah. So your ministry has a massive impact and far-reaching as well, which is testament to the writing style, I think, as well. If something's easy and clear, it goes a long way. And charitable and gracious as well.
Oh, glad. Thank you.
For our listeners, there's the Them Before Us organization, but there's also the Them Before Us book. So, Katy, can you talk about the goal of the organization overall, and then what sort of things that are covered in the book, and then we'll go ahead and unpack that through the course of the interview.
Yeah. So I began talking about marriage, because that's what was being kind of forced in our face. A lot of people realize I can't be neutral on this. I better figure out what I really think, And so it began with marriage. And what I realized during the marriage battle is that it was obsessively focused on adults and what adults want and their longing and their losses and their pain. And the kids were either used as props to support adults' points of view or ignored altogether. And then the more that I researched different family and marriage issues, right, from reproductive technologies to adoption, to same-sex parenting, to divorce, to cohabitation, to polygamy, I found the same dynamic. It was always adult-centric. It was always about the adults. And the kids seemed to be the acceptable sacrifice on the altar of adult desires. And interestingly, if you flip that dynamic, right, if you put them, the children, before us, the adults, in our personal decisions and our policy decisions, you end up coming up with great policy. You protect the hearts of children. And outside of a revival in this country, you could save the nation, just by putting them before us, children before adults, in all of these conversations. And so that's kind of what we realized was missing. Is there's a lot of great marriage and family organizations out there, but they are not necessarily child-centric, or maybe they use religious reasoning, or maybe they only hit one issue or here or there, and that's ineffective, right? So what we're trying to do is we are trying to say all of these conversations, everybody, pro-family organizations, conservatives, we tend to play kind of like whack-a-mole, right? Oh my gosh, commercial surrogacy is coming to my town. What's going on? Oh, same-sex marriage is being pushed, in my country. And we pretend like they're different, disparate issues, but it's really all the same conversation. It's really, the question is, are you respecting or are you disregarding the rights of children? And if you can, first of all, tell people about the rights of children to be known and loved by their mother and father, if you can make the secular and very well supported case that biology matters in parenting, that gender matters in parenting, and that marriage is a social justice issue for children, that is the foundation that you need to respond to all of these other threats to children's rights, from big fertility, from adult-centric adoption, from normalization of promotion of no-fault divorce. I mean, every single thing can be answered if you have a child-centric point of view. And then the other thing that we tried to do at Them Before Us is tell the stories of kids. These are very hard stories to find and very hard stories to tell, because you will wreck. You will wreck your family relationships. I mean, I have people who are 45 years old and children of divorce, and they're like, I'll tell you my story, but you literally you have to make sure nobody ever finds me. I'm still trying to be the go-between between a warring mother and father and balancing two Christmases. And I mean, kids whose parents prioritize their own desire above children's rights and needs and well-being are still having to act like the adult in their relationship. So we try to find and tell those very expensive stories of kids with two moms, of kids created through sperm or egg donation, of children created through surrogacy. And the cost is very high to these kids. So our website is really one of the only places, especially, that you're going to find the stories of kids with LGBT parents, because those kids, more than any others, are risking a lot to tell the truth.
How do you find them? Sorry, Katy. How do you even go about reaching out to these people?
Yeah, sometimes they find us, like Brandy Walton thought that she was totally alone. This was back in probably 2014. And she was raised by two moms and, one mom and then lots of other moms throughout her life. And I think she Googled way back when, I didn't like having gay parents or something like that. And then she found the few of us who were kind of like writing and speaking about it. Now that the organization is up, the same thing, people will kind of Google, like, I wish I had a dad, and then they'll find our organization. But a lot of times we find them. So we will look at people that write things on Reddit or videos on YouTube, and we'll look at the comments section of a kid who goes, well, I had two dads and I love them very much, and I'm not anti-gay and I'm not against gay marriage. I just really wish I had a mom. And so we'll reach out to them. And about only 25% of the kids that we talk to are willing to share their stories on the website. A lot of the times we just say, you can tell us your story and it doesn't need to go anywhere. Or, hey, let me share the stories of other kids who are also created through sperm donation so that so that you're not alone. So you don't feel like there's something wrong with you for wanting a father. There's something right with you for wanting a father. That just means that you're a human child. This is what human children want, is they want to be known and loved by their mom and dad. It's the world that's wrong. It's the world that's lying if they're telling you that 2 moms or 10 moms are going to be able to fill the hole in your heart that, where a dad should be. So it's kind of all the things, sometimes we find them, sometimes they find us, and sometimes they choose to put their stories on the website.
One of the things that struck me about the book, and I hope you don't feel like you've spoken to this a little bit, and I hope this doesn't sound like I'm taking a step back in the interview, but the subtitle of the book is Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. And what kind of struck me about that is how little in the public square we hear the phrase children's rights, or we hear anything about children's rights. It just hit me like a ton of bricks of, thinking about all the different, trans rights, women's rights. But I couldn't even remember a time where I was listening to the news and heard the phrase children's rights. So for my purposes, and I'm wondering if other listeners too would have this question in mind before continuing, what do you specifically mean by children's rights?
100%. We spent some time talking about this in chapter 1 because either it's a totally novel idea, right? That people are like, wow, children's rights, I've never heard of that. Or it's a term that they've heard completely perverted and misused, right? So the first option is I've never heard that children have a right. And the answer is they do. We build a natural law framework for the argument for children's rights in chapter 1. And it's actually a right that's recognized by the most widely ratified treaty in the world, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, where there's probably 5 or 6 different points in that convention that talk about the importance of children being known, loved, raised, and connected to both of their parents, both biological parents. So it's familiar for most countries, and it's embedded somewhere in their parenthood laws already, right? We make the case that it's a natural right. We have we're not philosophers, we're not natural lawyers. So we give some natural law support, but then we kind of talk about like how just generally the word right has been so abused. These days, anything that someone really, 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 really wants, they'll just be like, I have a right to that. I have a right to happiness. I have a right to parenthood. I have a right to choose. I have a right to government-funded birth control. I have a right to housing. Well, correct. No, we make a distinction between rights and commodities in the book and build the case that children have a natural right to their mother and father. But Chad, the other area that especially conservatives stumble over is that the term children's rights has been totally adulterated to mean children's sexual rights and children's right to be free of their parents' control and direction, right? And so you've got a lot of very high-level UN organizations like the World Health Organization, a lot of Planned Parenthood affiliates internationally, who use the term children's rights to mean children's rights to sexual pleasure or children's rights to
sex education, another big one.
Sex education, to transgender treatments, and that idea of children's rights deeply conflict with genuine parental rights. So I actually just finished filming a script for the Colson Center, which I think is one of the best worldview organizations, where we did a script on what children's rights really are and why true children's rights never conflict with true parental rights. So in the natural law sense, a nice little cheat sheet is most of us understand and would agree to the truth that parents have a right to their own child, right? That when you go to the hospital and you give birth, you have a right to take that baby girl home from the hospital, your baby girl home from the hospital. And it would be a serious affront to your rights if somebody said, no, you should have another kid. Take this other one instead, right? There's something very precious and intimate and distinct about that biological connection that we have with our own children. And so all of us, especially conservatives, be like, darn right, we got a right, parental rights to our children. Yeah, and don't tread on me. Well, children's rights to their own parents are the natural law flip side of that truth, right? That intimate, precious, distinct bond between parent and child matters to the kid as well. That baby has a right to go home with her own mother and father. And only in extreme circumstances would we challenge that truth, right? And it would take a lot of paperwork and a lot of counseling to break that link. So, and as it should, right? We should never, ever casually separate a child from their biological parents. So does that answer your question in terms of the whole right?
Yes. Yeah. It's very helpful. And I really found the clarification between what children's rights really are and traditionally are versus what we're saying they are now. Right. I thought that was really helpful. And I was just, wanted to make sure everybody knew what we were talking about when we were talking about children's rights. One of the other things you hinted at is the idea that unfortunately kids are used as pawns often, whether it be for the public debate surrounding marriage, whether it be divorce, politics, funding for education, whatever it is. In your book, one of the things that intrigued me is you took time to argue that both Democrats and Republicans should care about children's rights. And I thought that was really important because I could imagine somebody listening to this from whatever their political persuasion is and interpreting that way. And I thought you kind of removed that stumbling block, So can you kind of unpack that point as to why, both parties should see this as something that's valuable for them to care about and prioritize?
Yeah. We talk in the book about the stories, the examples that I give to my friends who are on the left. And I'll be like, tell me your cause. Tell me the thing that you're super concerned about. And usually it's like educational justice, where Black kids are falling behind, or high incarceration rates, or teen homelessness, is a really big theme. Youth suicide, drug use, and alcohol abuse, teen pregnancies, all of these issues, I man the suicide hotlines, right? And I'll say, okay, well, then you are on the children's rights train, because every single demographic that you just mentioned is overpopulated with fatherless children. And that there is no way that you're ever going to reduce the 90% of youth on the street who are homeless and fatherless, right? Unless you first secure justice for the individual child. Same thing with 63% of kids who commit suicide are fatherless. It's close to 70% of high school dropouts are fatherless. Around 85% of youth in youth prisons are fatherless kids. You're never going to have any measure of social justice unless you can secure justice on the individual rights of children to be known and loved by both their mother and father. So you can continue manning the suicide hotlines, but if you really want to get to the core of what is fueling those calls, then you need to be on the them before us train. And then I turn to my Republican friends more and more who are saying, well, we don't really care about the gay marriage issue. For the first time in history, a majority of Republicans approve of gay marriage. And I'm like, well, that's a conflicting goal with your other priorities for small government, low taxes, personal responsibility. And we go through 3 examples in the book of massive increases in education spending, massive increases in incarceration rates, massive spending on anti-poverty programs, and the amount of money that we are spending for literally no change or even an increase in poverty and high school dropouts and incarceration. Why is that? Because the state can't love a child. That's why. And no amount of money that you give at this is going to lower the amount of poverty and raise children's SAT scores and keep them out of prison. So Republicans, you won't get anything you want unless you get on board the them before us train, unless you get serious. And conservatives, you already understand that children's rights matter because you're fighting for children's right to life. Now, carry that mentality to this side of the womb and start fighting for children's fundamental rights in the family to be known and loved by their mother and father, because you won't get anything you want unless you do that well.
Well, I want to say real quick, and then I'll let you guys get in here. I'm sorry. But just for background for me, I'm an elementary school teacher, and I have been for 21 years. I've been in, schools where the large percentage of the population is poverty. And everything you're saying in regard to traditional marriage, in regard to the impact of fatherlessness, or the not having a mom and dad, all of that is hitting home. And I see that reality every day. So you are absolutely spot on from what I've seen over the last 21 years.
Yeah, we talk in the book about how there's 3 staples of a child's social emotional diet: mother's love, father's love, and stability, right? Those are the staples, right? Kids also need other things, but if they're not being nourished on those 3 social emotional staples, you will starve them emotionally. And you will see that starvation lived out in girls who are so hungry for male love that they hook up with, a guy when they're 14 and get pregnant, right? You will see that hopelessness in the kid who's struggling with suicide because dad is gone. You're going to see that in rates of anxiety and depression. I mean, you cannot expect kids you can't starve them of their fundamentals, mother's love, father's love, and stability, and expect them to go to school and focus, right? You can't. They're starving.
Again, spot on.
Well, that was one of the interesting things that I found about your book, Katy, is that it has a very high view of men, which I, quite frankly, am not used to reading. I mean, if you look at anything in popular culture, like I'm a huge fan of The Simpsons, but Homer's an idiot. Peppa Pig, their dad is an idiot.
What dad isn't?
Yeah.
What dad isn't on sitcoms? Dads are always the doofuses.
Yeah, and it's always the children who come in and save the day, or the gay man who comes in and saves the day, and nobody treats them with respect. But your book, I mean, you go to take a lot of time just kind of highlighting the unique attributes that a man brings to parenthood and the unique role that they play as parents. Can you maybe explain a bit more about that and why men are so important?
Yeah. Men and women are different. Gender is not a social construct, and kids need both, right? Like, so different are the ways that men and women interact with children that many sociologists say there's no such thing as parenting. There is only mothering and fathering, and kids need both. Men don't mother, women don't father, period. And so dads actually bring a really critical aspect of child development, and it blows me away, right, that we have campaigns to do things like make sure that there's female representation on various boards, right? A lot of countries have a threshold of male-female balance in their legislatures, for example. And yet we have destroyed the only institution that gets the gender balance exactly right every single time. And that's the institution of marriage, right? Interestingly, that gender balance, I think, is the most critical in the home. Like, give me a female president, give me a Nikki Haley, please, as a president. And from a religious perspective, God did not ordain men to be heads of the University of Washington, right? He ordained for men to be the heads of the home and the heads of the church. Why? Because those are the two institutions responsible for human formation. And without men, nobody's going to be made into good citizens, either good citizens of this country or good citizens of our heavenly country. So the role of men is so critical to families, and children, like we said, will starve without it. So what is it that men do that's so different? And the answer is everything. They talk to kids differently, right? Moms tend to, like, when there's a 3-year-old coming and go, "Oh, honey, did you get a little boo-boo? Come over here. Oh, honey, let me kiss it. Is baby okay?" And dads go, "Dude, that is a gnarly rash. Yeah. Like, how on earth did you get it?" Yeah. We've got to replicate that, right? So moms tend to dumb down their language right to the kid level. Dads talk to their kids like they talk to everybody else. And so it forces like this cognitive reach that's always developing. So babies, children, toddlers with dads have a wider, bigger vocabulary, right? Because dads are forcing them to think differently. Dads read to kids differently and better. Like, literally, there's a study in our book that talks about dads who read with kids, actually, the kids become better readers because of dad. And it's not because they choose different books. It's because they read the same book differently, right? So mom's reading the book to kids and she's going, "Oh, look, the pigs made 3 little houses and this one blew down," right? And the dads are going, "Where do you think that they got all that straw?" I mean, like, you would have to live in a state that has a lot of straw because there's not a lot of straw around here.
Planning permission. Yeah. Where'd they get the planning permission?
That's right.
How'd that pass health and safety?
Yeah. So the dads are asking these questions, the what's underneath it, right? The moms are like, let's evaluate just what we see. And dads are like, I don't know. Like, if he's going to cut down that wood, it would take him a long time. Brother had a chainsaw. I know it. Right. And so they are forcing their kids to think differently. Another huge difference is play, right? Dads are into the big motor skills, so running and jumping and climbing and wrestling. Dads wrestling with kids is a huge part of kids learning self-control. Dads wrestling with kids very easily soon learn, oh, I guess biting is off the table. Okay. kids that don't have a dad who's wrestling with them, they will learn physical limits from somebody, and it's usually the police, or it's often the police, right? They are going to have to run up against a strong boundary at some point, a strong authority figure. And unfortunately, that first real hard and fast boundary is the cops. And that is why, like almost predictably, fatherless boys tend to have higher levels of criminality. So that rough and tumble play, the big motor skills play is so important. But the other thing is dads just teach discipline. They teach lessons in a different way. You know, moms tend to say, I just laugh because like I'm living this every day, right? Honey, I just don't think that the way that you've spoken to your sibling is nice. You should probably think about that, go in your room, kind of mull that over, and come out and figure out what you need to do differently. And then the kid might take a couple days to do it, right? And dad's like, dude, you got to own that. Get over there and take care of it, right? They're better at teaching those very concrete principles of right and wrong. Moms tend to worry a little bit more about the immediate emotional well-being of the kids. Dads are just orienting towards making sure their kids will be able to thrive in a unforgiving world. So, I mean, it's so beautifully complementary, right? And how wonderful it is to have both a parent who is working on fine motor skills like chopping vegetables and concerned about the immediate emotional well-being, and a dad who will throw kids into the pool. You know,
Toddler tossing.
Yeah, toddler tossing. So toddler tossing is actually really important. It's so important to kids.
Yep.
It teaches them a lesson when they're 2 and when they're 1 in some cases. Like the world is a scary place, but also I'm safe with my dad, right? And the thrill of having somebody play and wrestle with them, that is not an optional component of childhood. It's a critical component of childhood. And dads do it in ways that moms don't.
Toddler tossing is one of my favorite pastimes. I have a 2-year-old, and my wife is always freaking out. She's going, no, you're going to hurt him. You're going to hurt him. I'm like, well, even if I do, medicine's come a long way in the past 50 years. He'll be fine. He'll be grand.
Well, and you do.
And he loves it.
You do need a mom who's like, whoa, put on the brake. And the dad who's like, no, let's go harder and farther. I have a friend of mine who's the uncle of a kid who has 2 moms. And it is so safe in his house. It's so safe. So when he's with his nephew, they do big, risky things. And it's really hard for the 2 moms. The 2 moms have put the kibosh on the 4-wheeling and the camping, pack it in, pack it out, because they're so worried about their kids' safety. And that child has really struggled with self-confidence, with feeling like they can go into the world and take on those risks because he's been shielded from a lot of the opportunities that dads just naturally introduce to confront the world and its risks and persevere.
Katy, us listening to it, I mean, we're all fathers here listening and like, yeah, reading with the kids and, throwing them in the air and bouncing on the trampoline and things. But the people you're interacting with that oppose that view, to me, it sounds common sense. To many people, it's just like, well, that's how I grew up and this is normal. But for others, it could be, no, this is not normal for me. That's not my experience. And, who are you to say that you're going to push that on us? And at the same time, they may come from the perspective of, well, you're trying to sound like you're making a secular case, but we just know that you're just a Christian shrouding these arguments with a secular thing. You're pushing your religious view and you're trying to get it in through the door using a secular studies and things. But who are you to do that? What's the sort of kickback and pushback you get from them? And do they have any good arguments on their side?
Yeah, good question. So, I say in the book, if you disagree with this, your beef isn't with me. Your beef is with biology, right? Biology is the bigot here, honestly. Right? Biology is unflinching, unrelenting, unforgiving. Your argument is not with me. Your argument is with the entire natural world. For your perspective to be true, everything about what it means to be male and female, the very measurable differences in how our brains work, how our bodies work, how reproduction works, right? All of that would have to be wrong for your view to be correct. And to me, that sounds like a religious case that you're making, right? That's completely disconnected from the natural world, right? I'm making a case that is grounded in the natural world, that is supported by decades of social science that is supported really down to every cell of our bodies that marks the differences between male and female. So your perspective makes a lot of sense as long as you are operating in a world of ideology. But anytime you run into reality, whether it's the reality of male-female differences, the reality of reproduction, or the reality of the stories of children who experience mother hunger or father hunger because they have been separated from their biological parent, your worldview breaks down. But, it's not me that's saying this. It's the entire natural world. So I actually think that the other side are the ones that are the religious zealots here. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I am a Bible thumping, married to a Baptist pastor. I was reading the Bible on the plane over the weekend with a woman sitting next to me. Like, I love the Bible. That is my authority. But we have got to appeal to the universal authority of natural law when we are making our case for this. And unfortunately, I think Christians failed at that for a long time. We thought the cutesy little, well, God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, was going to seal the deal, right? No, it's not. But the good news is that our worldview, our Christian worldview, aligns perfectly with reality, the natural reality that can be observed and measured. And it's from that basis that we need to make our case.
Yeah, and I think it comes through in the book really well that you guys let the data do the talking. Like you make arguments, but the arguments are based upon just solid data that's open for anybody to look into and investigate. And so I think, it's a very good case of, look, hey, it's like you said, if you want to disagree, fine, but you're disagreeing with what reality is telling us.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just doing a forum with a group in Singapore on divorce because Singapore is considering legalizing, in essence, no-fault divorce. I was looking at the chapter and I was like, oh my gosh, 73 footnotes. Probably could have cut it back in that chapter a bit. But what we did is we really tried to concentrate all of the best scholarship and then pair it with the stories of real life kids. And so the book, quick overview, chapter 1 is kind of the foundation for children's rights. Chapter 2 is why biology matters in the parent-child relationship and the extensive research on that. Chapter 3 is what we just talked about, why gender matters and why moms and dads are different. Chapter 4 is why marriage is a social justice issue for children. Chapter 5 is on divorce. Chapter 6 is same-sex parenting. Chapter 7 is donor conception, like sperm and egg donation, sperm and egg selling. Chapter 8 is surrogacy. Chapter 9 is adoption and why adoption is an institution that protects the rights of children. And we contrast it with big fertility that is a marketplace that commodifies children. And then chapter 10 is just our children's rights movement and what we're trying to do. And each of these chapters should be its own book. We tried to just select the most potent stories and the highest level scholarship in them. So really you can use it as a reference when you're talking to somebody about surrogacy and you're like, oh, wait, I know that abortion plays a big role in surrogacy. Let me find that section. And then let me go find, the studies and the citations for that. So we try to package it, but really the footnotes are there so that you can dive deeper if you need to.
Yeah, the book is amazing. I mean, it seemed like every chapter was like light bulbs coming on. Like you wanted feedback on the book. The feedback is it's amazing.
Yeah.
And yes, I can see it being used as a reference because the first pass is just like, getting woke up to certain issues that just didn't realize were there. In particular for me, when, there was the donor conception chapter was a real eye opener and all about the, embryos for sale and embryo adoption and all of the different things going on in various societies around the world where it's a commodity. And wow. Yeah, a real eye opener. I don't even know how to start to unpack that other than to say none of this is putting children's rights first. This is like everything's about the desires of parents and what they want to do with the kids. One thing I do want to ask you a question about, Katy, was same-sex parents. A lot of people would say they're going to get input from males in their lives. They're going to get input from females in their lives. So it doesn't make any difference if they have, two dads or two moms because they get that from their community or something like that. We can do just as good of job parenting this children. What has been your experience in that regard?
Yeah, we share several stories in the book of kids talking about how they had two moms or two dads and how incredulous they are. Oh, you think that my uncle's going to be able to do this? Oh, you think that my grandfather is going to be able to be a dad to me? And like literally one woman's like, I just felt secondhand. I always knew that, they were doing it because they kind of felt an obligation. They felt bad for me. And they're like, I don't want that. I want my dad. I want my own dad. And those other figures, right, which sometimes people become single parents because they are the only adult, the only parent that's willing to act like an adult. Sometimes people find themselves in these broken family situations, not because they choose to, but because of tragedy or because, like I said, they are seeking to do what's best for the child. In those situations, we do need to come in and we do need to offer that paternal love or maternal love that the kid is missing. We talk about that at the end of chapter 6, that you can carefully identify kids who are experiencing mother hunger or father hunger and seek to include them in your world, right? So I do think that that's important. So far, I have yet to meet a kid who said, yeah, that's everything that I needed. Thanks. That totally assuaged the primal wound that I felt by being separated from my father at conception and knowing that he willingly sold me and doesn't want a relationship with me. Even if there is a paternal role model that's coming in, that paternal role model does not offer children the biological identity that children crave. It does not offer them the 100% male presence that they need to thrive, the complementarity right in the home that helps children on a daily basis to develop, thrive in their development. And so, yes, we do need maternal and paternal influences if they aren't there. But you are fooling yourself if you think that that is going to be a replacement for a child's own mother or father.
I hear someone saying, it's nice that you use these stories that are emotional, but you're handpicking these. I can go get you other stories on the other side, so your stories don't count. How do you respond to something like that?
I would say, you're damn right I'm hand selecting these stories. I absolutely am, right? Because these are the stories that you're not going to hear in the New York Times, right? These are the stories that people are not going to be given an internship in the Obama White House if they come out with and give a passionate speech about. I mean, like the kids who love being raised by two moms, or the kids who don't care if their parents got divorced and they're super excited that whatever, their mom is now coming out and going to live her best life and identify as a lesbian. Those kids are lavished with praise, and they are going to get a front row seat at the parade. I mean, like kids who affirm what their parents are doing, they have outlets everywhere, right? And those kids do exist. But we say in the introduction, this is for the silent majority, right? This is for the silent majority of kids who will be excoriated, right? Who will be rejected probably by, the world, but perhaps even by their family if they are to tell the truth. And so these are the stories that you're not going to hear anywhere else. If you want to hear the stories of the kids who love that their parents are in an open marriage, just look at the New York Times about once a month, right? By the way, they don't ever interview the kids. It's always the adults going, my kids love this, right? Give me the kid who, we quote a couple kids with poly families who grew up in polyamorous homes in our book. And more adults does not equal more love. More adults equals more risk. That's what that means.
More danger.
So
yeah.
We are absolutely giving voice to the kids who are not going to be able to, you're not going to hear their voices elsewhere. And it also happens to be the kids whose stories align with what we already know and have proven through decades of studying family structure.
Yeah, I think, too, if I were in a discussion and I were sharing, for example, some of the stories that you share in the book, and somebody were to say something similar to what Brian said, well, she just handpicked those stories. I think one of my replies would be, and do you think that New York Times and sources like that don't handpick their stories? So I like what you're saying is essentially it matters which stories correlate to the rest of the data. Right. And I think where you have the strength on your side, or the kind of the weight behind your argument, is that your stories do correlate with the actual data, whereas theirs contradict it.
I was just going to throw in there, too, Katy, is like, it would seem to me like we've got plenty of data about traditional homes and families and how things have changed since those structures have changed, but we don't, it seems to me, have the data from down the line 20 years from same-sex parented children. So this like an experiment in many ways, and who knows where that's going to take us. What's your thoughts on that?
You're exactly right. So, when we were making our big push for no-fault divorce in the late 60s and 70s, we didn't have these longitudinal studies on kids who had suffered a divorce. And so at the time, you could say, well, the kids are going to be happier if the parents are happier, or the kids will be fine, or the kids will get over it. And we didn't have robust longitudinal studies with adequate control groups where we were able to identify participants at random and then survey them as adults about their actual experiences rather than just what the parents said that their kids were experiencing. Those didn't exist when we were passing no-fault divorce laws. But once we got to the 90s, we had a lot of data, and it was bad, right? And so now, conclusively, people will look at divorce, and even people on the left, and be like, yeah, not so good. But every new iteration of family, we have not been able to study the impacts of surrogacy on children, right? We don't yet have a lot of studies on kids with same-sex parents because it's going to be 2 or 3 decades before we are going to be able to find those kids at random, actually measure their experiences. Right now, most of the studies that have been done on same-sex parenting is literally a survey of recruited adults saying, hey, does your kid like having 2 moms? And the moms are like, oh, yeah, they love it, right?
Yeah, like they're going to say no.
Right. Especially when they knew, that this study was probably going to be used to advocate for the passage of same-sex marriage laws. I mean, we spend the whole first half of the same-sex parenting chapter destroying, Katy and Stacy destroy the studies on same-sex parenting. And we point out all of the methodological flaws in that research. And then we contrast it with the couple very robust studies that we do have on kids with same-sex parents. And it turns out that those no differences that were touted ahead of legalization of gay marriage actually means massive difference in outcomes for kids with same-sex parents. So yes, this is not, same-sex marriage was not the beginning of the redefinition of family where they were trying to push an idea that was unsubstantiated by science. It's not the end. There will always be, more iterations of, oh, we have an artificial womb now. The kids are going to be fine, right? And then it's going to be 2 or 3 decades before we're able to really study the impacts of growing children, not just creating them in a petri dish and inserting it into a woman, but babies that grow up with spend the first 9.5 months of their life void of human contact at all. But until we have the studies, all we have is adult desire manifesting and parading itself as fact.
I think that was one of the most poignant things that I read in your book was quite close to the start of the book when you said that, when a kid loses a parent through death, everyone gathers around and says, oh, that's terrible because they understand the weight behind losing a parent through death. But if a child loses a parent through divorce, people will just say, oh, kids are they're strong. They'll get over it. And that's what happened to me as well. You'll be fine in the long term. It's sad now, but in the future, you'll be okay. It's really not. Yeah. It's not. So they're not two very different approaches to parent loss. Right. As you say, it's very adult centric. The second one, because it's all about the adults' happiness. It's not the children just get on with it.
There's one study that shows that children are psychologically less damaged when they lose a parent to death, rather than losing a parent to divorce or abandonment. Why? Because when the parent dies, the kid goes, they didn't want to leave me, right? They didn't want to, right? Okay. But when there's a divorce or an abandonment or a donor conception situation, what's the kid to think other than it must have been because of me? I must have been the problem. This is especially true in divorce cases where it was low conflict. A high conflict divorce or an abusive divorce, usually the kid experiences some measure of relief and goes, well, the divorce happened because mom couldn't get off meth, right? But in the low conflict divorce situations where it didn't seem like there was anything wrong, the couple just fell out of love and the kid's going to be fine, right? That actually has the greatest psychological impact on children because the kid goes, well, it must have been my fault. That's the only rational explanation that we have. And Belfast Bigot, you're exactly right about this messaging to kids. We actually talk about this a little bit in the chapter on marriage and how redefining marriage is not going to help kids with 2 moms or 2 dads. Actually, we call it a national form of gaslighting. right? That now there's nothing in these kids' worlds that validate their longing and their loss. Now everything, not just their communities, their inclusive and tolerant communities who are telling them, you're so lucky to have two moms, right? The only thing in the world that the kid has that says I should have a dad is their internal cry for a dad. But when that's not validated by any of the adults around you and not by any cultural or legal markers, the only response is for the kid to go, I must be crazy. I must be crazy for wanting this. And it really inflicts a lot of damage to kids.
I want to just make a plug for this book. For everybody who's listening, this seems like this book is sort of an answer to my quest, because for so long I've find all these apologetics books that have to do with, is Christianity true? Does God exist? Is the Bible reliable? And then I kind of reached a dead end where, how can I engage with what's going on in culture right now, because there's no book for this. And when we were talking to Wintry Knight in that interview, he's like, he's the one who suggested, check out Katy Faust's work. And man, I'm so glad that he did, because this to me is Christian in its foundation, yet it's able to rally secular arguments, data, facts, stories, experiences, and use it in a really persuasive, powerful way to engage so many of these topics. So those who are listening, if you want to, engage with, the fact that biology matters, gender issues, marriage issues, divorce, same-sex parents, donor conception, adoption, all of these different things, it is such a great resource. Katy, thank you for writing the book. And I want to draw attention to one of the things that you do at the end of, I think, most of the chapters. You put, a DIY section in there. Like, can you talk a little bit about that, about the practical application? Because, we could think about this as like, oh, these are just ideas. What do we actually do with this? Elaborate a little bit on that approach you've taken.
Yeah, well, we take a very unforgiving tone when it comes to all of these different issues. And we first want to spell out the truth and why, when we get these questions, answers to these questions wrong, the very real harm that comes to children. These are not abstract concepts. Children are harmed if we do not understand this correctly. So the first thing that we try to do in the chapter is make it very, very clear that if you choose to ignore the rights of children, you are harming them. And then at the end, we try to say, okay, so what do you do about it? There's different struggles that different adults have. We say in the book that in the world of children's rights, no adult gets a pass. This is not a book that requires the gays to do hard things, right? This is a movement that is going to expect everybody, single and married and gay and straight, to do hard things. So that is kind of the theme of the DIY section, is how do you need to do hard things when it comes to your struggling marriage? How do you need to do hard things when it comes to being an adult with same-sex attraction and then seeking to form a family? How do you need to do hard things if you're an adult, a sweet Christian married couple who's struggling with infertility? What does doing hard things look like in this situation for you personally? But also we say, what does proper policy decision look like in light of the fact that biology matters in parenting? And so we really try to say, and so what, throughout each chapter. And that looks different depending on the issue, but it always has to do with adults doing hard things so that children don't have to.
Super.
I think one of the most challenging things that you talk about in the book and you've experienced in your life is when you're discussing social issues related to marriage, sexuality, whether it be so-called trans rights or abortion, how quickly one gets labeled a bigot, of course, or whatever phobic, fill in the blank, right? So what have you found in kind of your journey, your adventure that you've kind of been gently pushed into, let's say? What have you found successful in engaging with in these types of conversations in a way that people can actually hear you and that you can have rational disagreement?
Well, in as much as it depends on you, try to have a rational conversation, right? That's the Romans chapter 12 version for cultural engagement. Sometimes you can't because having a rational conversation takes two people who are willing to have a peaceful conversation. So sometimes you can't do anything about it. Sometimes you will be labeled a bigot, hater, homophobe, transphobe, whatever. I will just tell your audience personally, I am still afraid of that. I've never stopped worrying about what people are going to say and do about me. It's just something that I have to kill every day. You know, I have to crucify that part of myself that lives in fear of how people are going to respond. But then realize that defending the most vulnerable is a mandate, especially for Christians. You must do this. You must do this. And people who choose to stay silent, or especially Christians who compromise, especially on biblical teaching on this, like Jesus had very strong words for people who were causing children to stumble. And, you know, these days, that really does have to do with their primary relationships. First, their right to life. And then I would say second is their right to their mother and father. Christians, especially, if I'll just take a minute to talk to your Christian audience, never apologize, never backpedal, never compromise on God's design for sex and marriage and relationships. Never.
Amen.
It is always going to be kids who pay the price for your cowardice. And honestly, I was quiet for too long. And I don't know, you know, maybe I could have done more to stem this horrible child commodifying tide that has turned on our nation. But I was afraid, and I let my fear dictate rather than God's righteous commands. Now, that's not to say that you go in with, you know, flinging your guns. I think as Christians, we are called to stand firm. We're not called to be aggressors in the culture war, but we are called to be immovable, right? You plant your feet on God's design for sex and marriage, and you don't let anybody shove you, not 1 inch. And I have found that it's really helpful to understand the secular support for God's design. And that's what we hope to do in this book, is to fill you with courage and confidence that God's design for sex and marriage is the only child-friendly option when it comes to adult decision-making and how adults use their bodies and form relationships and all of that. Never apologize for that. Never apologize. So I just want to encourage your audience that you can do this and still be afraid. In fact, that's how I do it. I do it while I'm afraid. I just can't let my fear dictate what I do. I have to let the biblical command to protect and defend the least of these lead me. Because, you know, as Christians, we are mandated to offer special care and protection to the fatherless. Failing to advocate for God's design for sex and marriage today is literally manufacturing fatherless children and motherless children. So, like, if you don't do this, you are literally doing the reverse of what it takes to care for the fatherless, right? You are endorsing, incentivizing, and blessing the creation of fatherless and motherless children. So don't ever shrink back.
So here, in a sense, I hear you saying that, you know, the goal is to have a reasonable, rational conversation based upon having the rights of the child in the forefront, and also based upon good argument and evidence and data. But at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do. And regardless of how the individual you're talking with reacts, it's still your duty to stand for the child.
Yeah. And, you know, I think I love 1 Peter. I really do feel like it's the culture warrior's guide to engagement. Talks about how, quotes the Old Testament, where it says, you know, Christ is the cornerstone, right? That the builders rejected. And then a couple verses later, it says he's also a stumbling block, right? So notice that in both of those situations, he is a rock, right? And Christians really fail if they try to make Christ and his truth anything other than a rock, which a lot of denominations are doing. They're like, it's not really a rock. It's more of like a Plato sculpture, right? And so they're trying to compromise. They're trying to change Christ and his truth from a rock into something that feels a little more acceptable, right? He is a rock. His truth is a rock. His truth and his teaching around marriage and family and sexuality is a rock. However, Christians have failed in the past because they have added additional stumbling blocks to the path, right? So we need to be careful that Christ's truth and teaching about sex and marriage is the only thing that people are stumbling over, not our inability to reach out in friendship, right? Not our poor presentation of this, not our hypocrisy on this topic, right? The only stumbling block that people should be having difficulty with is Christ's truth and his teaching alone, not because we are inadequately up for the task or failing to communicate in a compelling way. So I do think that Christians need to be experts. I think we need to know more about this than anyone else, especially parents. I would encourage you to make your kids expert on all of these topics because they are getting a fire hose of ideology from the world. And if you think the little trickle droplets of, whatever VeggieTale shows they're watching or, the drop off at Sunday school or whatever it is, I'm sorry. But the good news is that you and your kids can become actual culture transforming forces if you are well equipped for the task, and you can be. And I've seen my kids change people's minds about this.
When I'm discussing these things on my Facebook page, when I'm copying and pasting your arguments,
exactly
in response,
yeah,
and why not? They're amazing. One question that I would get time and time again, it's kind of like a gotcha question, would be, well, would you rather a child be raised by abusive biological parents as opposed to a loving gay couple?
Right.
So now I have answered that, and I suppose I'd like to hear what you would say, but I have said that if you had to put a gun to my head and make me choose, then of course the loving gay couple, because the kids aren't going to be abused. But how would you, did I do the right thing by saying that? I mean, what do you think?
I think you did. And the other one is, well, would you rather a child languish in overseas orphanage or be adopted by two loving moms? Right. And to that I say, I have actually lived that. So the case was I used to work in adoption. And I was friends with a gay couple, and I know because I was connected to the agency that they used that there was a little girl who was older, who had special needs, who was languishing. We use that word so freely, but she literally was languishing in an orphanage. And I know that several heterosexual couples had passed her over because her case was too difficult. And they said, well, we will go get her, but it's going to be really hard. Katy, will you go and help? And I said, hell yes, I will. Absolutely. Right. That little girl is going to get, what she ended up getting was life-saving medical coverage and stability of these two women that provided her with what ended up being yearly surgeries for her condition. And she was absolutely better off with those two women. Now, you can recognize those cases, and you can recognize actually the spinelessness of some heterosexual couples who are waiting in those long lines for white drug-free infants rather than accepting the difficult cases, the children who are orphans and desperately need somebody to do the hard thing in their life. And then still recognize that you don't need to overhaul all of marriage and parenthood and family law to recognize those exceptions, right? And so the case of the abusive biological parents and the loving gay parents pits one exception with another exception, right? So statistically, we know that biological parents by far are the safest adults in a child's life. Okay. There are cases of abusive biological parents. Like that is the ultimate violation of them before us. But like those cases exist, and those parents deserve to have their children removed from the home. But if you're under the impression that non-biologically related parents are going to be, on the whole, a safer option for children, you are disconnected from reality, right? I just dare your audience right now to pause the video and Google the words mother's boyfriend and tell me what you see. How does that go? Right? A cohabiting unrelated man is the most dangerous person in a child's life, statistically, right? And that's the exact reason why adoption agencies and adoptive parents like me have to go through months of vetting and screening and background checks, references, home studies, supervision, post-placement reports, because social workers are not fools. They know that it's risky to place a child with unrelated adults. Biological parents by default are going to protect their children. Non-biologically related parents by default are not going to offer the same level of protection. So there are situations where there's abusive biological parents. There are cases where non-biologically related adults are going to match that level of care. They are both exceptions. To come to the conclusion where same-sex parents are going to provide the same thing as opposite-sex parents, you have to rely on exceptional cases.
And, it strikes me as a really dishonest way to argue, because I feel like if I was in a discussion with somebody like that and they asked me that question, would the abusive biological parents be better or a loving gay couple be better? I would want to say to them, well, let's say I go ahead and say that the loving gay couple in that situation would be better. Let's say I go ahead and say that, which, you know, in that extreme case, I get that. But would you agree with me then that in every other situation, if the biological couple is the loving couple and there's a gay loving couple, that the biological couple would be better? I almost guarantee that they would not admit to that, which just tells you that that's not really the argument. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it just strikes me as a really disingenuous way to argue, appealing to those hard cases.
Well, and they always appeal to the exception, right? They always cite like an incest, right? Well, are you okay with abortion in the cases of rape and incest? And even if you said, okay, yeah, but then do you agree with me it should never be legal in the other 99% of cases? They'd be like, no. Right? They're using the case, they're using the exceptions, not because they're being intellectually honest. You know, they're using it because they are pushing an ideological perspective that is disconnected from reality.
Well said.
Just very quickly, it's interesting that you say that adoptive parents would have to go through all these kind of red hoops and red tape to adopt a child. But then you say in your book that for surrogacy, all they need is money. And I just think that none of those rules apply. And it's just really telling of today's culture where you can buy. And it's usually well-off gay men because it's out of everyone else's reach. Surrogacy, really. So yeah, that's shocking.
Reproductive technologies violate every best practice of adoption that have been developed over the last couple decades. It's not medical in the sense that it's actually trying to heal, help, and move towards holistic options. It is simply the buying and selling of children. That is the only way to put it. The children themselves, 50% of children themselves created through these technologies would say, the commodification, the commercialization of my conception bothers me. So we cite quite a few of their stories in the book as well. This is the buying and selling of people. This is the closest that we've gotten in this country to what we fought a civil war to end, and it's happening. It's happening now.
Yeah, this is, I mean, there was a lot of hard things in the book, but this was that sort of topic was the real eye-opening, like, whoa, I didn't know this was going on, and this is really disturbing. Commodification of unborn kids, and I mean, how is this not designer babies? You know, who will I'm going to flip through a book and find out what the dad looks like, or find out who's going to be the carrier of this child so that I can buy them. How much will I pay you? Yep. And it's like, whoa, how is this not racist? And just terrible. I don't know where to go with that other than to say something has to happen in the culture. You know, the arguments that are being made in this book, and we need to open people's eyes to the reality of it.
Yeah, well, being horrified is the right response.
Yeah.
And disturbed.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion, and there's so many more things we could probably unpack, but I really appreciate your time and what you're doing. Can you point our listeners to your resources and where they can find more of, your book, your toolkit, what other resources they might have available to them? Yeah.
So the website is thembeforeus.com. So that's kind of the hub of our movement. The book is Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. You can get it on Amazon, but you can get it cheaper and avoid the Amazon machine at christianbooks.com. It's on audio books. There's all kinds of different platforms for the audiobook, which I got to narrate. They literally made me audition for the part, but then they finally gave it to me. So If you are not yet tired of hearing me talk, you can get 9.5 more hours of that business on like Audible. And the book really is the manual for our children's rights movement. It really is. We were very, very specific with the publisher about how we wanted a detailed table of contents so that when you're in a conversation and somebody says, if you oppose gay marriage, it's the same thing as opposing interracial marriage, right? You grab the book, you look, and you're like, okay, let me see exactly what the argument is against that talking point. So we have really tried to break down. We've been doing this for almost 10 years. We have heard all of the questions. We have heard all the rebuttals. We have answers for everything. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And like I said, when this comes to town, because depending on what state you live and what country you live in, the redefinition of parenthood is heading your way. Big fertility is looking for a new market. The gay marriage human rights campaign machine will overwhelm you too. So you may as well just have it in your arsenal, right? You are going to have these conversations with your friends who are in difficult marriages, who are thinking the kids will be fine. The kids will be happy if I'm happy, right? You are going to have that father hungry child with two moms down the street and need to know kind of some of the struggles that he's experiencing, right? This is going to be in your personal world. It's going to be in your political world. and nobody else is going to do it, right? Academia is not doing it for you. Big media is not doing it for you. Your government is feckless, and they are not going to do this for you. Only you are going to be able to do this. So that's what we hope to do. Is we hope that the book makes you into unflinching warriors for the rights of children.
Awesome.
Well put.
Well, thanks again for coming on, Katy. Appreciate it and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. And Belfast Bigot, we're going to have to meet up in real life for a throwdown.
We are.
Oh, yeah.
Let's get ready to rumble.
Battle of the Bigots.
There you go. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If you have a question you'd like us to address or just a message for us, feedback, good or bad, you can either email us at podcast@apologetics315.com or leave a voice message for us using SpeakPipe. Just go to speakpipe.com/apologetics315 to leave us a message. And remember, if you include a Ghostbusters quote in your question, we guarantee that we'll read it on the podcast, and we also ensure up to 50% better quality answers. Also, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a review in iTunes or the podcast platform of your choice, and please share this episode with a friend if you found it useful. Remember, you can find lots of apologetics resources at apologetics315.com, along with show notes for today's episode. Find Chad's apologetic stuff over at Truthbomb Apologetics. That's truthbomb.blogspot.com. This has been Brian Auten and Chad Gross for the Apologetics 315 podcast, and thanks for listening.
You are a proud parent, keeper of a clean home. But when the kids get messy, you reach for Fiora paper towels. Strong, absorbent Fiora is durable, economical, ecological, for a spill that's wipeable, on a surface that's cleanable. Fiora is suitable because it's dependable, affordable, and sustainable. So you'll feel comfortable using Fiorable. How adorable. Fiora paper towels. Smart. Feels good.
Peacock fuels your true crime obsession with exclusive new originals like John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise.
He said to me, clowns can get away with murder.
Dr. Death, The Undoctored Story.
This guy's dangerous.
And Epstein's Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell.
She inherited Jeffrey Epstein's secrets.
There was this whole other world going on.
Plus the most bingeable crime series, Buried in the Backyard and Snapped. And with the Dateline 24/7 channel that's always on.
Did you want her dead?
You can't not obsess. Sign up now at peacocktv.com.